And Lotta, feel free to ask any questions. It's a group discussion or a common feeling is always the native way, the indigenous way. So it's just family, and just if you have a question that you're curious about, the native people or why they have difficulties, why do they have such a special spiritual feeling, anything like that, just feel free to ask, eh? So, it's type thing. Sure, okay, are we started? Oh, we started already, okay. Um, um, well, this show is a show that I want to leave the Danish people with a feeling about the indigenous people and how it relates to the three principal world, our world that we sit in. And I wanted to emphasize that we just don't want to talk about the indigenous world like from a museum perspective, but we wanted today's show, we're going to try, and Steve and I and all of us are going to try and show how Sid sees it. Because I was the one person who we talked a lot about the indigenous world with, and I got a lot of perspectives on that, and he had a very beautiful feeling towards the indigenous people. He really felt they saw the same way that he did. And that's the first connection you have, is that if he emanated the ancient wisdom of the three principles, then the ancient wisdom of the indigenous people is the same. And that's how so he had a very good thing. And the other thing that was when he made The Great Spirit, the CD that very few people ever watch or listen to, he did that because he knew he hadn't shared enough with the indigenous people. The opportunities weren't there, and he also knew I was walking into that world, and he wanted to leave a message for people. So if you want to know how Sid Banks saw that connection between those two worlds, you take a look at The Great Spirit. It's really an unusual CD. And one of the things that is very outstanding about it is that it's not a lot about three principles, very little, almost not at all. It's a talk about oneness, it's a talk about spirit. And that was one of the things he told me: when you're with the indigenous people, don't use mind, thought, and consciousness. It's not mind. Mind is a psychological word for God. He didn't, that's why he started talking about mind as one of the principles. He said, use spirit. So you talk about spirit because that's the indigenous world. And that's one example of the fact that our terminology is not good for the indigenous people. The way we talk, the way we express it, the way we think we know about their world, that's all gets in the way of the truth. And you have to step into the music that they play, not the music you play, to be able to grasp that feeling. And the reason Steve and I are doing this together is because, as I expressed to Steve just a few minutes ago, of all the people I've met in the three principles, Steve is the one person who I feel is emanating the feeling and the presence that Sid was talking about. Sid talked not about spirit, he talked from spirit. And Steve, when he talks about the native world, he's talking about it from an inside out feeling. And that's why this is our second talk in this topic, and we're going to be doing a series later on in the fall with another group of people. And the reason we're together is it's so unusual, really, Steve, because, I mean, you're not native, and I don't even know, you've hardly done any ceremony or anything like that. And I'm not native, and yet there's that feeling. Would you agree with that, Steve?
Absolutely, yeah. I think something for me from childhood was very in tune to Mother Earth, very tuned to the natural cycles of life. And to me, that's where my spirit would lead me. I didn't see it as any different. So I would be quite bemused and a little bit unsure when I found out that everybody didn't feel the same way. But I easily would get lost in nature. I'd go and play hide and go seek, and I would find a place and lie on the earth and become so still with the earth that people couldn't find me. And in the end, I'd end up going and saying, I'm here, okay, you can find me. And they were going home because they'd had enough. I went on to find out that what I was doing there was, in principle speak, falling out of my thinking, just being at one with the oneness of the Creator. I wasn't making myself go anywhere. It was something, it was just naturally happening. And the delight when you'd mentioned earlier on about going to the native part on Salt Spring Island, and that's how you and I, well, we were at the school together, but that's how you and I made that connection. And I had an experience when I was actually on fellowship. So I was on Salt Spring for 7 weeks, and I was at a time where I woke up with so much thinking, it was unbelievable. And we decided, Tony and I, that we'd make a picnic and we would just go to anywhere on the island and just enjoy. And so he knew that if he took me to the First Nations part, that would be good for me. And we'd been there before, but you know, when you see life with new eyes, you see it like never before. And to me, that's the gift of spirit within. So we go along to this ocean and we find some driftwood and we sit down. And as I sit looking at the ocean, I noticed that without even trying, my breath started echoing, moving with the ocean. And I found myself saying the words, isn't it incredible that that ocean knows what to do? There's a gentle moving in and out. And there's no one there with a piece of string pulling it and making it go in and out. But it knows to just go. And Tony says to me, but it's the moon it helps it do that, which I knew already. But in that moment, there was even more amazement there. Because how many millions of miles apart is the oceans to the moon? Yet this unseen energy, unseen force, can make it echo and flow, just the same as our heartbeat. And in that moment, my thinking was completely gone, and I was in the one heartbeat from the Creator. I was in a space where I could imagine the young native people running and playing and laughing. And I just felt so light and so free. And I felt in that moment that I was the ocean. I was the driftwood. I was the earth. I was everything around me. And the only thing it made sense to me was that moment. And that's what I shared when at the school we were asked to share, and that's what I had shared at that time. And that's how Harry and I got speaking about that. So my experience is not that I have done anything. I've always had a heart. It's not even a fascination, but a heart connection with Native people, Indigenous people.
Can I talk a bit about that then? That's
sure.
A good, yeah. So the way the Native people would see that is that we all go back 7 generations or forever back in time. And in the past lives that we lived, or the spirit, we had different experiences within that self. And I just sense that within Steve and I, we had somewhere back in our time, we had this experience, this indigenous experience that just was recognized as soon as we became acquainted with it. In fact, we were living it long before we recognized it to be. And when I was going into the sweat lodge, I had this question of what I just brought up. How come I'm a Jewish person and how come I'm so closely tied to the native spiritual world? And I went into the sweat lodge, and and I, as I was there, a wolf came in, the savage teeth and sweat, saliva, and my first inclination was fear, because it was just so gruesome. And then I said, wait a sec, the teachings of the three principles and is you don't be afraid of your own thoughts, you know. So I then welcomed this thing, and it came in me, and I became that wolf. And while I was that wolf, I felt the raw savagery and the incredible feeling that it had. And it told me that what happened in my life was that at the beginning, in a very prehistoric time, a Jewish man and a native woman came together. And that's where I emanated from. And then it took the name of the Jewish man and moved on into the echelons. But back in that time, that's where I had originated from. And that feeling brought something into me. It's not a question about past lives or anything. It's a question of knowledge. And knowledge poured into me in a way that connected me past this form, took me to the formless energy that I am. And that's the world that the native people understand. And I'd like to read something from Meta Louise Holland. She just worked with people up in Greenland, and this is her email to me. And I think this explains, Lotta, the native way, and this is what Sid emphasized, the what Meta happened to write. So it touched me quite a bit. By the way, Harry, recently I was contracted by some people from Greenland who happened to have read my 3P book and wanted to know more about the 3Ps. Some of them got huge insights into oneness and spiritual essence of life. It sounds like it's very easy for some of them to see deep. Maybe it resonates with their native religion, stories, beliefs. I was thinking of you and your experience with the Native Americans, and she gives a smile. Here is an insight one of them had. Now listen to this, Lotta. It's a different way of feeling. That's what you're looking for. Not your way, a different way of feeling. They taught me a lot, Lotta. They taught me about the mystical side of life, my nature of mysticism. They taught me how to feel beyond my Jewish boundaries. They taught me so much about who I am and the world of spirit. And it was easy to go into it because of my understanding of the three principles. So the three principles acts as an anchor into this mystical world that we walk into. So this is his insight. I dreamed or saw a giant light, kind of a sun, where there was sort of a source. Water, energy, love floated from it. And I knew that this was my home. I could fly around and be free. And I was home. That's me. That's us. That's my true home. But I'm already home right now, even if I'm not physically there. I knew in my whole being that I will never lose it again. That's a native feeling that we're trying to point towards in the experience of what it is that Steve was pointing to, what he experienced intuitively. Because of course it is just an intuitive feeling of something that comes from inside and is expressed. And if it's your nature, it's good to express it. If it isn't, leave it alone. But if it's your nature, it's the same with Chris when we went up into the sacred mountains in Denmark. it's his nature. It was my nature too, but it was his nature. And together we could sing in it, we could dance in it, we could feel it, and it had no words, had no words. And the same thing when I met Steve. It didn't have words, but at the moment he opened his mouth, I said, oh, he's got it. He's inside the bubble. Most people are outside the bubble, Lotta. They don't know what that world is. Just the same way as Sid when he was talking. A lot of people still don't know what he was talking about. They're talking about the spirit. Sid wasn't talking about the spirit, talking from the spirit. It's a big difference type of thing. And within that, I want to show a few things just because it's a native world and I like to show off. I have I've been in the native world since 1994 and 96. And my spirit name is Standing Elk, Waskazugani poet, carrier of the mighty Tonka pipe, carrier of woman's medicine. In a way, you could say I'm a man of the spirit. That's the natives see me like that. I do ceremonies sometimes, Lotta, where 200 natives are there. I'm the only white person and I'm doing the ceremony. So it's an unusual thing. But when you have the three principles, you don't let your thoughts get insecure with that type of stuff. It's happening, so you do it type of thing. So this, I don't know if you can see this, isn't it a beautiful feather and the carrying case? Woman gave it to me. This is a turkey feather. And she gave it to me because I'm such a turkey. Yeah. So, type of thing. Another man gave, because I helped him so much, he gave me all these eagle feathers. You could feel the energy of it. Powerful, powerful energy. Another lady, she made me this, she said a man who carries a pipe like yours should have a nice carrying bag. So she made me this beautiful bag to carry my pipe in my bundle in. Another lady sent me this sage from Kansas City type of stuff. And then another person, a climbing squirrel, gave me the pipe that I carry. I don't know if you can see it, but it was carved, Lotta, in maximum security prison, which I wasn't in there, by the way, and with a nail and a stone only. It's from the only sacred mountain in North America, and it was the lead pipe in Nevada prisons by the strongest carrier flying climbing squirrel. And when we shared energy together through letters, he felt he had to give his most precious possession. It was his teachings. And so one day the pipe arrived at my place with a feather and teachings and so on. And I said, what is this? I'm not a pipe carrier. But it turned out he was right. The first thing it did, Lotta, was that it allowed me to go into native reality, not as Harry Derbitsky, but as a pipe carrier. Like a doctor, like a PhD that people have. This is my PhD. And so they accept it. They see it as a gift from the spirit. They don't question about that. And that allows me the freedom to share my way of sharing and my understanding within it. And it allows me to touch feelings that I honestly don't touch with too many other people. Because even though the three principles world is cool, it's still clinical in my understanding of it, type of thing. So that's just a few things that I wanted to show off. Hope you don't mind, Steve. I just wanted to show a little bit of that off, just to show that I'm not really playing at being in the native world, and I'm not enamored by it. I'm just in the bubble of it, and within that they often have prejudice and so on, but they always want me to come. They're always welcoming because of two things. I'm a kind heart and I know something, and they can recognize that. They may fight it, but they recognize it. And in that world, of teaching these people how to bring in the world of psychology and spirit together, because that's their problem, is that they see spirit better than any other culture in the world, but they don't connect it to psychology. So they have that separation that they need to have. But in regards to the feelings, they have the understanding of the feeling of the spirit intuitively. It's just as natural as you talking about weather is for them to talk about spirit. And so the shaman came over last Friday. We played tennis, and he ate at my place, and he's very powerful. He doctors people, so he has the healing powers, cancer, a bunch of other things, and so he provides all that healing. But he also has a master's in education, and he's working with the government and in the community. He works in the school system. He does ceremony. He's a modern Indian. The Indian of today is not the ones that you see. And one of the reasons we're talking about this is, Denmark has Greenland. They're indigenous. They will lead at a certain point in time, just like our indigenous people are starting to emerge now and starting to take a leadership role. But to step into the commonality of the three principles, the two worlds, is when Sid talked about it on the Great Spirit. He talked about this oneness, walking past the ego mind to the spirit. And he basically would say something like this: the native people see everything is spirit. Everything is spirit. And then it is all created by the Great Spirit. And within that context, it just leads you to an understanding of one of his favorite things: it's all one. So, Steve, could you maybe say a few words now? I'm sorry, I just wanted to get that out. I just had that in my craw, I guess you could say. Yeah. Go ahead. Whatever you will feel like you want to deal with.
Sure. I'm fascinated by how people show up and where they're showing up from in the moment. And you mentioned a word, what kind of, and I really get what you were saying about the three principles world can look quite clinical at times, but from my heart, I can't see that. And I say that mind, spirit, is our natural common sense. And I think we've innocently, because of this gift of psychology, which is powered by mind, the spirit, we've innocently got lost in form. And one of the things that when I heard was that to realize that no matter what form or whatever I create or whatever lost I get, that spirit is still strong within. And that wisdom comes with an innate wisdom that it cannot be taught. So we've tried, I think, in form to be better, bigger, bolder. But our natural common sense, it's like looking at the stars and thinking that we have to tell the stars how to be stars. It's looking at the ocean and saying, this is what you need to do to be an ocean. The spirit or the energy of the stars, of the ocean, of the earth, me too, you too, and everyone here that's listening. And that's what I heard on Salt Spring. Things that maybe that I would grasp or think, could this possibly be true? The principles just really gave me the feeling to understand what I was thinking. And I realized that that feeling, common sense, is something that I can trust. And I realized that trust is, it's not me who, when I look at trust or truth, it's not Steve in this form, it evolves. It's the spirit of who we are. It evolves. And as it's evolving, it's going like the ocean, in and out, and meeting different people and having the experiences. But it reminds me that every single one of us, when we came to this earth, we were born free, like a blank slate. When I feel the whispers from my soul, from spirit within, I'm reminded of that blank slate, and such a gentle feeling that I can't help but see you and me and you. I can't see clinical. I can't see form too much. If I do, I see beyond these eyes in a feeling. And that's what I felt that time on Salt Spring. I'm trying to explain when I say I became at one with the driftwood and so on. Of course I was sat there in form, but I realized in that moment that what Sid saw clearly was that we have got so lost in this world of form that when you look at the indigenous people, they have so much to share naturally with us that they won't get into the form with us, because they say that that's where you're moving away from your true source. I have this orchid plant, which it was beautiful, ready to come into bud, and it got broken. And I decided rather than snap the whole thing off, just to leave and see what happens. And what happens is 3 weeks later, it's regrowing. It's following what it's designed to do. And to me, that's what I saw with the principles. That I can resist the flow, or I can realize that I go with the flow. And to me, that's what, when I hear you speak, when I looked at my sensing, my feeling, whatever we call it, was that there is no resistance when I just understand in that moment with simplicity. Something unfolds with grace, with ease. And it allows me to see that nature doesn't fight with itself. We are the same energy as nature. Yet we think that being this human race that we are superior. But I love the story, Harry, that you shared about wolf, because we can see that they are allies. There's a totem in there. And I had a beautiful story, which if you don't mind me sharing, because I always had, and it's when I was on fellowship and there was Tommy from Sweden, and we were put into small groups, and I was sat at the back of, or in his cabin, and I was, so that the window looking over St. Mary's Lake. So he was watching behind. So he says to me, you have a fascination with native people, don't you? And I says, well, I don't know if it's a fascination. I says, but I love where their heart speaks. And he says, what do you mean? I says, well, let me tell you a story, I says, of that I heard many moons ago. And it's a Native American woman called Jamie Sams. And she brought out power cards. I can't remember what they're called. And she tells this story of deer. And deer was wanting to go to Sacred Mountain. So one day she sets off and she walks along and she's saying good morning to everyone, and she's welcoming the grasses and the trees. And she gets that she puts one hoof on the bridge to cross over to Sacred Mountain. And this voice says, who goes there? It's me, it's deer. You cannot come on my bridge. She puts the other hoof on. No, I'm off to Sacred Mountain. No, you're not. The other hoof goes on. And this ogre jumps on. I told you, you're not coming on my bridge. And deer turns and says to ogre, I'm not afraid of you. I'm going to Sacred Mountain. And the ogre was so taken back that he cried and says, "Can I come to Sacred Mountain with you?" She says, "Always." Now the metaphor of that is the ogre is our ego. It tries to stop us from being with the sacredness of who we are. And Sacred Mountain was a place that she was happily recognizing is within. And that each time that we find that we're lost in this world of ego, gentleness is asked to be given to ourselves, from ourselves. So I'm sharing this story, and he says, "An eagle." Yes. And I went, and he says, "No, eagle." And as we looked, there was a mother eagle with 4 young going over the lake. And us, like kids at Christmas, ran down with their cameras, and they were flying over. And that moment, I'd say to him, see, when we honor the sacredness of life, we're gifted in ways, because I saw that as eagle is one of the most sacred. An eagle flies. The reason why it's sacred is because it flies the highest of any birds. So they say it's nearer the creator, it's nearer the sun. So to have eagle grace you is a gift. And here we had the mother showing us. So I was just really filled. So when we see that this world of formlessness, there's so much more for us to live from, with the simplicity, because I see the teaching of the indigenous people. When I say simple, I just mean it feels so much more easier life than how we create, of just being at that one, of recognizing the heartbeat of everything, the energy of everything. And what it did for me is it recognized that, I can never be alone. This creator has created this world where we can never be alone. How majestic is that? When we start seeing through those eyes that everything is our brother, sister. Everything is in that primordial heartbeat. For me, when I start feeling that, I feel big. I don't mean as in I grow in this form, but I just feel so big and at home. So there's what Sid saw, is that when we see that there would be nothing on this earth, the principles allow us. And this is what I was seeing, Harry, fresh, when you were saying that. And I've said this before many a times, but I saw it differently when you were saying, was that there would be nothing on this earth for us to understand without the 3 principles. And we have that free will, we have that gift of where we wish to direct it. And I think for me, I was brought up in a religion which I enjoyed the ritual. I enjoyed the stories that went with it, but I found about the ages of 14, 15 that I was too much in my thinking. And that's when even more so I went towards native cultures. Because I was finding there that they would again go within. They would go within. And the more that I started looking in that direction, then the more I found what we say big mind. The more we found my spirit within. The more I found my wisdom voice. And it allowed me to start seeing that I mentioned the ocean. We are this great ocean. We're the droplet in the ocean that becomes the ocean. And I love when we start, and it's not just really nice words to say, but I just think when I look at the indigenous world, the native sharings and the native teachings, that's where I see life.
That is life.
And it's almost like now there's no words. There's the nature of the principles. The true nature of the principles, as what Sid uncovered. And he saw that native people honor that. And that perhaps as non-native don't. We've gone the other way. just the same as the religion that what I was brought up in, even though I honor it lots of ways, it was a way of you have to, where for me, my understanding of native cultures is it's still finding your connection to this oneness and realizing that we're all part of the oneness, but it's the honoring and the sacredness of your connection to source. There is what I feel Sid saw. And what I saw fresh when you were speaking was that, so we're all given this gift of being a blank slate. We come to this world and we have free will and what direction we'll follow it. And native people, for both of us, seemed the more, I'm going to use the word simple again. This word keeps coming to me. And my ego tells me I don't like it, but I'm going to go with this word simple because I think we have become so overcomplicated. And the heartbeat of natives, of indigenous people, doesn't feel complicated to me.
So let me tell the same story that Steve just said, just from, but using sort of indigenous words type of thing. When I was doing a talk with Melinda Eagle Klein, who is a native social worker with a master's and teaches at university and teaches with the indigenous people, she was trying to relate the three principles to this shaman. And the shaman said she was trying to talk about innate health, the innate wisdom within every human being. And he says, oh, you're talking about original medicine. That's what we called it, original medicine. And she said, yeah. And when she mentioned that, that touched me. And then I happened to be going to a gathering where the shaman had come together for the people in East Vancouver. And East Vancouver is the homeless, the drug addicted. It's kind of the derelict part of town with a tremendous amount of people suffering. And they wanted to help the people in the suffering of it. And so I went to, there's about 300, 400 people and a lot of powerful healers and so on there. And and when I arrived there, my head was, as Steve was talking about, in the ego, in the mind. And I arrived there and said hi to a few people. And then they lined up on the side and the drums started. And then the bears started to dance. They had bear skins and you could feel the power of them. And then each person walked around and they smudged us off with the feathers. And as I went through that, all of a sudden I could hear the drums. I couldn't hear it before. My mind was caught up in me, in my world. And all of a sudden I could hear the drums. And as soon as I hear the drums, I'm flying into the feelings of the oneness of everything. And then I sit down and this elder gets up and he talks about the same thing that the other shaman talked about in Kansas City. He said, originally, everybody, now this is Steve's words, everybody has sacred, he didn't use original, he used the word sacred medicine inside of you. And every morning that you get up, you want to share that sacred medicine with everybody. And if you share that sacred medicine, it passes around and it provides healing. And what comes back to you is that feeling of more sacredness. And that's what you want. That's what will free you from what is ailing you. And it really touched me because it was true. And of course, he was speaking from a deep, deep feeling, the elder, a wise one. And it reminded me of, I work with a lot of addicted people. And well, in a section of my life, not all, but they're looking for a feeling of hope. That's all we want to pass on to them, is this feeling of hope. And if they can catch this feeling of hope, what happens is that they open up like a can, leave behind all their dreary, serious thoughts, and their true spiritual nature rises and soars with the eagles. And as soon as it soars with the eagles, their dreams become reality. They are left behind all that addiction because they are living in the world of spirit. And they know it as much as the indigenous people do, because they're suffering and they've looked at all these altered states of reality. But with the advent of the three principles, it points them to free them to find their own medicine, that sacred medicine that's inside all of us. And that's what Sid was pointing towards. He always had only one message: it's inside you. He never really had another message. He did, of course, have to talk, but he was always talking about it's inside you. And I worship Sid. I idolize Sid. That didn't work. It was inside me. It wasn't, he, of course, had it in spades, but if I was giving that power outside of who I am and not feeling what I am, then I have nothing to offer. And I never, even though I lived on salt spring, I never really got that till I was 69 years old. I just never got it. And then all of a sudden, it all made sense. And then the simplicity of what you're talking about, Steve, really was there. It wasn't there, and then it was there. And that's what I love about your story. It wasn't there, and then it all made sense.
And it's like the gift that keeps on giving. Like, I love your openness and your honesty and your truth, Harry, when you say that it took me to the age that I was. And that was one of my things at the beginning when I had my thinking was, what's the longevity of this? And even though I knew, but I still looked through my psychology to try to understand. And the moment that I dropped my psychology, I understood. It's almost like psychology. We stand under it, and it creates a ceiling. It creates a roof that we can't. But when we see that we are the spiritual being having the human experience, it opens. And then we realize that our consciousness is unlimited, that our spirit is unlimited, our thought is unlimited from the divine. And that's where Native people would look towards, the divine in all of nature and all of ours. And that just gives life so much more fun. And I think we start then talking about more. Well, it's interesting. I was speaking with a client the other week, and she dropped into wisdom, or her thinking dropped. And I was asking her, so where are we now? And she couldn't explain how she was feeling. And that was beautiful. That was beautiful, because when we try to think what we're feeling, it's not leveling itself. And when we just realize that when we are with that spiritual energy, that oneness, and live life from there, we see that life truly is inside out. It truly is from that one primordial heartbeat. We're all beating from the same heart, the same energy. Sid saw that so clearly. That's what I saw when I had my understanding on Salt Spring. that we're all coming from the same source. How we use it in our form is how we use it. And he saw that native cultures used it the most simplest way versus the other things that they're trying to get ourselves to the Creator, to God. That's what I saw again. So even the moment that we think in our psychology, when we learn that, yes, I know that now. So as a psychotherapist, well, I know everything about psychology. But here's me in this moment, completely heard something new. And this is I love when we allow the playfulness of our spirit. That we realize that we're always continually learning. Not growing, learning more to be in tune with ourselves each moment. And that's what I, again, love, is that before I heard principles, I would still try to grow, make better. Now I realize that everything I need is within. Everyone. And when I see that, then that lack of confidence or whatever we make up as our form just drops away. And I see, again, that we're in our natural common sense. And we see it play in our world from when we come as a blank slate, and then all of a sudden we start wanting to sit up, and then we start wanting to crawl, we start wanting to walk. So we see that this natural common sense, this wisdom, is continually evolving us and continually growing us. And when we start looking towards that, then we see life very differently. Then we see life very differently. And we see life in all its beauty. And so when we were talking, you were talking, and I see, I can't even remember the word now because I've moved on, but I'll say, let's say you said something like clinical. It was like, oh, because it didn't feel like you and I were in that place. Well, and for me,
it's a perspective,
sure,
of what we see. And bringing that up, I'd like to ask the other four people this question, and we'd like just to hear what you have to say about this question, Chris. Maybe you could say, since the native people are naturally gifted mystically, and when Steve was talking, that he defined the mystical reality from that when he started talking about beauty and all that. And so why do they have so many psychological trauma problems and so on that they cannot overcome, and has held them back? And they're emerging from it, but it's still, it's a painful process still. And they're still caught up in the pain of their past experiences. Why would somebody who is so spiritually enriched have such a difficult time?
I have an answer to that, because they don't have any psychological immune system.
What does that mean?
It means they're totally vulnerable. Harry, we were talking about that in Salt Spring Island. You were talking about the same thing when we were sitting having dinner in Salt Spring Island. And the reason why they're subjected to this feeling is simply because it goes right into them, because they don't have any filter. Where should the filter come from? And this is what I call the psychological immune system. It is that is one of the things that is brought into us with the Western civilization. And the reason why they are so much in touch with oneness is really the gift of not having that immune system.
And at first I was a little shocked to hear you say that, but there is a truth in what you're saying, Christian. In the native world, the first people who were the most susceptible to the alcohol were the shaman and the healers. And the reason was they were taught to receive. They were open channel to receive anything that they felt was positive energy. Of course, misinterpreted the positive energy of the alcohol, but it did make him feel good and have a party and so on. But so they were the most susceptible, and so quite often the people that ended up on the street were the more spiritually gifted.
Exactly.
And so at first, honestly, Christian, first I went, "Oh my God!" But he has a point about that, and so on. And what is interesting as well, Christian, is they've now reclaimed, gone back to their culture and to their. This is so interesting. They never lost anything.
No.
Except some time. They all their spiritual understanding and wisdom didn't leave them. For a while it was on hiatus. I agree with that. But when they resurfaced back again, they came back that much wiser, that much stronger, that much more centered than they were before. And I guess you would say they had learned some rough lessons that they needed to hear. But they were not weaker when they came back. They just naturally, just like that, stepped right back. Just like that. It was just like, whoa.
Can I say something?
Yes.
Well, I think there's some different, in a way, I think it's interesting I think everyone, Sydney Banks says everyone is equally spiritual. Yeah.
That's absolutely true.
So saying saying that everyone in the native world is kind of spiritually gifted would be the same as saying that everyone that's black has a good voice.
Yeah, can dance.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think sometimes there's been talks about the people who were shamans, in our system would be seen as people with kind of psychotic or, have some kind of psychiatric problem. But in a tribe, they would be seen as great, wise people that really could speak to the spirits, blah, blah, that kind of stuff. So I don't know, but I think what you've done, Steve and Harry, is put together with the three principles understanding, and just it's really very interesting because for me, I was just, while I was listening to you, I remembered coming home from hospital where I nearly died years back, and looking out in the garden, and suddenly I had contact with the birds. Suddenly the birds were my deepest truth, my deepest friends on earth. I couldn't explain this, but I was kind of, wow, what's this? It was as if something shifted. And when I read about Sydney Banks, that was one of the things that I remembered, this profound shift that I couldn't explain intellectually, because I'd been very much in my intellect. And they're my friends from now on until I die. These blackbirds and whatever, and I can't explain it, but I feel we communicate, and so that's for me the wisdom. That's why I'm interested in this. That this is communication with the heart. So it's got nothing to do with intellect. So when we start trying to understand it, we don't. Well, it's an understanding that's different from analyzing but it's like having a friend. It's like having a secret friend, or it's like being surrounded with friends, because all of a sudden all of nature it's not an enemy or something. It's actually, wow, you have this great ally or that you didn't know you had, and I think that's that you can feel welcome anywhere, that you have the wisdom, everything, and I think that the indigenous people have, they've just been very much aware of this, but of course they can also be distracted by, booze and stuff, because and especially if you're very open, you can easily get hung up in this kind of I remember reading about Greenland that one of the problems in Greenland was that they have to have these people in Greenland work in a factory, but they live for the seasons, and now the whales, and now the seals, and now the fish, and so they'd leave their workplace because they had a totally different clock inside, and so that's one of the reasons why they sent a hell of a lot of Danish people up there and made a lot of mess. So I think it's about being in contact with real life, about being in contact with nature, and of course nature is the mirror of yourself.
Mm.
It's what we really are. Yeah.
And one thing I want to emphasize is with the drinking. The reason there were many reasons why they went to drinking, and we're talking about a whole culture here. We're not talking about 30%. We're talking about 98% of the people were alcoholics. And the reason they went into that world in many cases was idleness. Everything got ripped, everything that you're talking about, that connection to nature, and they got forced to move onto a ugly place and all this, but they had nothing to do, nothing to relate to, and they were idle. And what idle minds, it was looking for something to make them feel better, because they were very hard working, brainstorming, ingenious people who could feel the nature talking to them, and the spirits talking to them, and they would walk into a beautiful, exciting experience. I mean, imagine you get up in the morning, you get on your horse, and you take a ride out into the mountains where nobody else is. It doesn't sound too stressful to me. And you shoot a few deer, and maybe the one that Steve was talking about, I don't know, but there's a harmony that they had, and within that they always had disharmony. They were warring with each other, and they were doing things, but it made sense to them. It even though it doesn't make sense to us. And their ceremonies don't make sense to us. I mean, Sundance, they pierce your nipples and they pull you up a tree and stuff like that. And I went, oh my God, that's, and then they want me to do it. I go, no, that's not for me, and it's a connection that is beautiful. And the beauty of it is that's exactly what Steve says. And Chris says, it's in all of us. And I was surprised. That how they could open me up to things, of gifts that I had, gifts that I couldn't learn from the white world, gifts that allowed me to get into my feelings of expression uniquely. And then, of course, what has helped me tremendously, Steve, when I went deeper inside, was I can use those gifts that I learned from the pipe without the pipe. Because of course I don't need the pipe. It's just the pipe. But it isn't, Steve. It's like everything else. It's like the sunset. It just grows in beauty in your heart. And as your heart grows with it, it grows in its understanding. And they can feel it. They pick up the pipe and they go, oh, this pipe. Chiefs have smoked this pipe. Thousands of people have smoked this. I can feel it, they say. I go, that's right. You're feeling it right. And it's beautiful. And Chris described exactly how the natives talk. This is their word, the heart. What you said, that's how they talk. about, the heart. That's what when Steve is talking, he's talking about the heart, and in their way. And we want to. And Lada, it is the only religion that's female based. It comes from White Calf Woman. It's not male oriented. It's not coming from Jesus Christ or a guy type of thing. It's a female based. And that should give you a little bit of the mystery of what Steve is pointing towards. It's a sensual feeling of being alive with the spirit in, out, everywhere. Don't ask me to explain it because I can't. Type of.
Can I just say something? Because when Chris was speaking, I love, because I was sitting resting in the same place of that when I heard Sid say that in the spiritual world, no one is more holier or spiritual than anybody else. And I love that because that took me completely out of here. And there is a wonderful saying where intention goes, energy flows. And that energy flowing is the divine mind, divine thought, and divine consciousness as uncovered by Sid. And Sid saw that native people, before people got in the way, lived universally from that space of divine. And your question, Harry, of how comes the suffering now, comes back to, I think, what Chris was saying, where no one is no holier or spiritual. We all have this intellect. And I think what's happened is that we've simply forgot who we truly are.
Mm.
And when we forget, it's so easy to reach for something, and what looks like outside of us will give us gratification, will help us. And of course, we know the addictive alcohol and drug abuse, and we know that they're addictive to this human form. But that for me, that's when people hear that within themselves, like you beautifully talked about when the drum, and you're reminded of your heartbeat. You're reminded that we all beat the same. And those people started popping like popcorn. You put it in the microwave, pop, 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 pop. Who knows when our spirit will wake from the hypnosis, from the turmoil of this psychological experience, and see that that's just the glimmer of who we think we are. But our true nature is where people, native people, would have worked the land more. And I see it no different from when religion came along, this man-made thing, where I don't see the heart of native people as being, they worked with the land. There was a sacredness in everything. Everything was honored. And I think when we look around our global world now, we can see we've lost that. We can see where we've misunderstood our sense of nature. And native people knew that well. And I know at our heart we're all native. We all know that. We all know that we're really wanting the same thing. And I feel that their ways of working to get us back to the same heartbeat is Sid saw that we are there, or by our thinking. So he saw how he saw, but he still saw that in this world of form, if we're going to, well, there's an expression that I had, and it was one of the times I was leading something in Sweden, and I had this, and it didn't make sense to me at the beginning, and then as nature has it, it made sense to me. And it went something like, we can dance with truth, or we can be truth dancing. When I dance with truth, I'm like listening to a ballroom and I want to do a jive. It's just not adding up. But when I realize that I am truth dancing in this world, I am native spirit in this world, and I'm dancing with the great oneness of life, then we all dance together. There is no oh, they're dancing better than me, or oh, I like that step. We're just dancing through life together. Native people knew that well. And that's where
they welcomed everybody to do that.
Yeah.
Even if you were off tune, they welcomed you.
Yeah.
They knew you were adding, if you were singing from your heart, it didn't have to be a beautiful voice, because you became beautiful with the singing of everything. And that really helped me tremendously.
Yeah.
Tremendously. Well, I'd like to finish off with one last little thought, and because we're getting, tight. First of all, Steve, I want to tell you how much I have enjoyed listening to you. Really,
Ditto.
it was really beautiful. We are only scratching the surface of this topic. As we've done this the second time, it feels so much different than the first time. I was a little sensitive about talking to so many white people, before. So, but that's a stupid thing to say. I take that back. Apologize. But the beautiful feeling, and really appreciate it. It really touches me. I want to finish off with this last story. It's an important story. When Sid went to, it shows how the principles, the simplicity of the principles explains everything. Einstein was looking for the unified theory of life, and he couldn't find it. He found from here out. And then Hawkins was looking for the theory of, I forget, of reality or something. But Sid found the theory of everything, and it was mind plus consciousness plus thought equals reality. That just comes from his second Enlightened Gardener book. So it's not a, and what it meant was that whatever he was talking about, he understood. I don't mean he could play tennis better than I could, not that type of stuff. I mean, so when he went into the physics world, there was a large company in Florida, and Sid wanted to talk to the leading physicists in the world. And he went into it, and the guy said to him, Sid, you stay still and don't open your mouth. These are the top guys. You learn from them, but don't talk. And the guy says, I have to go now. And when he came back, Sid was on the board writing, and he went, Sid! And the guy, all the other top physicists said, shh, shh, shh. He's talking. And he was explaining how the theory of Einstein was E equals mc squared was wrong. Because still, mc squared is still in the finite world. It has to be, energy has to be formless. So at that time, c squared was so unlimited beyond the imagination, it made sense. But in reality, the formula was wrong. And when he went and did the Great Spirit, he knew nothing. In some ways, I guess you could say he was like Steve, a natural. He knew nothing about the native world. So he phoned me up and asked me, and I gave him an explanation of the medicine wheel, about 3 minutes. And he said, thank you. I didn't realize he was going to make the CD. And when he talked about this medicine wheel, you could see him looking at his notes because he couldn't remember what I had told him. And when he's talking, it's the same thing. He's talking about the spiritual principles of native spirituality. He knows everything of how and what it's expressing, and the feeling it's expressing, and the way that it works, how mind works, except of course he was saying spirit, how spirit works. And so he was the leading expert. And when natives hear that, they go, is that a shaman, or because it's pure truth. And so at the level that when we go into the feeling that Steve and Chris were talking about, you're just there. and it all is just the same stuff. It all makes sense. And then we express it. Steve and I like to express it through some of the native feelings. That's all. Nothing special. Just somebody else likes to do it through physics. Nothing. Great. Somebody else likes to do it through baseball. Nothing wrong with that. It's just the way. And Sid, at the very essence of the three principles, the reason he loved them so much was that you couldn't replace them with anything else. Man keeps having higher evolutions, but it's always still diluted because it all comes from the source, the three principles. And that, to me, is a miracle that Sid could talk about native spirituality so sublimely, so perfectly, without knowing anything about it. And that's the reality that I had to come with when I walked in it. I am not native. I have to be myself. That's good enough. If I do my best at myself. I tried to be native. I tried to do all the stuff. It didn't work. And finally, the Spirit told me. It told me the message to life. I'm not talking Sid Banks said this. I'm saying the Spirit at the sacred mountain, a different sacred mountain with the pipe. And I said, why aren't more people hearing what I'm talking about? Why aren't I helping more people, especially Native people? And they said to me, this is the message from the Spirit, and this is the message I have for you. They said to me, you do your best, and we'll take care of the rest. And that's the way it works, guys. You do your best. You just don't have to do any more than that. It's so easy, really. You can relax, take it easy, and you know if you're not doing your best. So that's luckily, Steve, we have the principles to, when we mess up, we know to head back home. That's to me the greatest gift in the universe. I'm not so impressed with Harry, but I love Harry's spirit. And I actually love Harry the way he is too, because he's so funny. He's worthwhile enjoying, type.
You should hang out with him more often, Harry.
Yeah.
Chris, were you going to say something?
No, I was just giving thumbs up.
Oh,
Okay.
Okay, so thank you very much, guys. I wanted to do this as a parting gift to Denmark, and part of it came from when Meta wrote that thing, and also within a second, I wanted to do it with Steve, and within a second, he answered he wanted to do it back, and that's the spirit too, eh? It just came. I had no intention of doing this. I'm so glad that we've had this opportunity. It's been very helpful for me, and also I wanted to share this perspective to the three principles, the mystical side. And you know who I consider to be the most mystical person of the elite three principles? You know who I consider that, Steve? It's Elsie. Yeah. She's very mystical. Yeah. So simple, just a little housewife talking ordinary talk. Very mystical lady, very mystical. You wouldn't think really that those are the words. And Sid was simple too. He was very simple, but actually relatively deep. Yeah.
And I think that really is the truth, and the whole truth and nothing but the truth. And that's the thing that really got my mind to still when I really was questioning what are these three principles from a psychology point of view. It was Elsie that, and I hadn't looked at anything of who Elsie was, who Chip was, even who Sid was. I wanted to get to Salt Spring, and if it was really this true, then I would find. That's how stuck I was. But Elsie kept on floating in. And I love that you've said that, because now it helps me understand why the word simple kept on coming. And it's not that Elsie's simple, but her nature is simple. And it's the same as the Chipmans, Jan and Chip, is simple. Sydney Banks was simple. When we did fellowship, it was simple.
Yeah.
And that's what I see when you're in your true nature. You're simple. And it's not to get messed with the form of what we think we are, but it's our natural common sense.
I love that phrase, by the way. That is a really good one, natural common sense.
Yeah.
The natives actually, that's another native word. They love the word common sense.
Mm.
They're very practical people. They like practical examples of stuff.
Yeah.
And, you know, and they don't, if you say something like, I'm a pipe carrier, it's just as an example, they won't accept that. You have to tell them a story around it.
Yeah.
The feeling of what you have with it. You can't just say, I am.
Yeah.
You have to, it has to come with an illustration.
Beautiful. Beautiful.
So this has been a lot of fun, guys. I've really,
Yes.
really enjoyed it. Thank you so much for coming.